Here's what's coming up on The World Today. We're still awaiting updates on U.S. President Donald Trump's health status since he tested positive for COVID-19. The president is being treated at a military hospital near the White House. The World Health Organization says at least 10% of the global population has been infected with the coronavirus. Plus, the Congress of South African Trade Union calls for workers to participate in a national strike. A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Akaite Afia in Lagos. We are watching out for any updates on U.S. President Donald Trump's health status following his admission at the Walter Reed Military Medical Center near Washington, D.C. Before that, we are learning that the U.S. Vice President Mike Pence has tested negative for the coronavirus. Mr. Pence has reportedly taken multiple tests, and all have come out negative. He has a busy few days of campaigning ahead of him, culminating in a TV debate with Democratic vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris. Should the president's health leave him unable to discharge his duties as president, Pence would be first in line to take over as president, according to the U.S. Constitution. We are also learning that the White House press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, has also tested positive for the coronavirus. She posted this on Twitter saying, "After testing negative consistently, including every day since Thursday, I tested positive for COVID-19 on Monday morning while experiencing no symptoms." But she says no members of the press are considered close contacts. Meanwhile, President Trump is expected back at the White House today, according to White House sources. Earlier, doctors had said they would decide today whether he was well enough to be discharged. Here's more in this report.
Medical experts have harsh words for U.S. President Donald Trump following his decision to leave the hospital and greet supporters with a drive-by on Sunday. The extraordinary episode came hours after a briefing by Mr. Trump's medical team, who said that the president had continued to improve and could be returned to the White House as early as Monday. Meanwhile, supporters of the president stand outside Walter Reed National Military Medical Center waving U.S. and Trump 2020 flags. They are here to wish the president a speedy recovery. Outside the country, Taiwan says it hopes that President Donald Trump can get better from the coronavirus soon so that he can continue to lead the free world in resisting China's savagery. The Trump administration has made standing up to China a key policy platform and has been particularly vocal in criticism of China's human rights record, whether in the far western Chinese region of Xinjiang or Chinese-ruled Hong Kong. In the Middle East, Israel's rabbis pray for the U.S. president to recover from COVID-19, invoking his name in a Jewish holiday ceremony at Jerusalem's Western Wall. Support for Mr. Trump, who recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the U.S. embassy to the city, is strong amid Israelis.
If there's one thing you can't do too much of right now, it's to pray for the health of the entire world. I was able to have the privilege to pray at this holy place, to pray for people that I know very well who are afflicted with corona, and people who I don't know at all who are afflicted by corona. And I wish all of them a complete and speedy recovery.
The announcement on Friday that President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump had contracted the coronavirus coincided with the Jewish High Holy Days, a time of reflection and penitence as well as of celebration.
Well, let's talk to the VOA's White House Bureau Chief, Steve Herman. Steve, great to see you. Welcome to the program.
Pleasure to be here.
So, can you tell us what is the update on the U.S. president's health?
Well, a pool of reporters is right outside the front entrance of the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center right now. We have not been given a time for a briefing, but we do expect to have one from that team of doctors who did brief reporters on Saturday and Sunday. So there is no fresh firsthand information from any of the president's physicians.
Well, let's talk about the White House press secretary then, Kayleigh McEnany, testing positive for the coronavirus. So what is the reaction to this in the White House, especially among White House correspondents and those of the press?
Yes, all of us here at the White House, when we're either inside the building or we go upstairs and outside and interact with the press secretary or other people, we do put our masks on, as you can see. Yesterday, the press secretary did speak to reporters outside the West Wing on the north lawn of the White House for just a couple of minutes after she did a hit on one of the television channels, and she was not wearing a mask. And I would say some of the media were probably within 2 or 3 meters of her. So that is a bit of a concern. And what it does show is that even though the president and the first lady are diagnosed with COVID-19, there are still White House staffers that are not adhering to the recommended guidelines about social distancing and wearing masks. And now, unfortunately, the press secretary is also reporting she's infected. Thankfully, she's saying she doesn't have any symptoms, and everybody hopes for a speedy recovery. But there's a lot of shaking of heads among members of the White House Correspondents Association just about White House staffers themselves not following the recommended guidelines.
Well, Steve, I want to talk a little bit about the vice president for a second. So Mike Pence has again tested negative for the coronavirus, and it said that he's taken many preventative steps. Is he expected to be continuously tested until the president returns? And what else is the White House saying about having both of them heading back onto the campaign trail?
Yes, well, there's no indication the president's about to head back on the campaign trail, but there definitely is a schedule for the vice president this week. Of course, he's going to be in a debate on the stage in Salt Lake City with U.S. Senator Kamala Harris, who is the Democratic Party's vice presidential nominee. And he also has campaign stops scheduled in other places. It remains to be seen what those resemble. Will they be like the rallies that President Trump has had in recent weeks and months with large crowds, no social distancing, and a few people wearing masks? Or will they more resemble what the Biden campaign has been doing, which have been very sparse crowds, people sitting in socially distanced circles and really following a lot of protocols?
Well, we will be keeping an eye to see how that debate does play out. But before you go, Steve, we also understand that if the president is unable to fulfill his duties because he's too sick, the vice president would take over. So if such were to happen, what impact could that have on the November 3rd election?
Well, there's no indication that we're facing that sort of situation. Now, there could be a temporary case, which we've had many times with presidents when they undergo a medical procedure where the power is signed over to the vice president for a very short period of time. But if the president, for any reason, would become incapacitated for a longer period of time, yes, then there is the 25th Amendment to turn power over to the vice president. But that's really something no one here is talking about, especially when we have seen the president appearing on Twitter via video and then riding around to somewhat of a controversial response in a suburban vehicle last evening out in front of the hospital, showing that he is alert and ambulatory and that he may even be coming back to the White House later today.
All right. Well, Steve, thank you so much for joining us today. Please stay safe out there.
Thank you. We will.
All right. Well, meanwhile, in other parts of the world, and especially in the UK, over 12,000 cases of coronavirus have been recorded, according to the government's coronavirus dashboard. Now, this comes after nearly 16,000 coronavirus cases went unreported in England between September 25th and October 2nd, delaying contact tracing efforts. Here's the global update. Well, before we do get to that global update, the World Health Organization says an estimated 10% of the world's population has been infected with the coronavirus, leaving the rest of the world vulnerable to the disease. Head of the WHO's emergencies team, Dr. Mike Ryan, was given the update today at a press briefing. He said the rise of infections was putting countries heading into winter at risk of virus amplification events as more people gather indoors. So far, more than 35 million people around the world have been infected with the coronavirus, and over 1 million people have died from COVID-19.
The global numbers belie significant differences, as I said, in regional epidemiology. Southeast Asia continues to see a surge in cases, with Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean regions showing an increase in cases and deaths. The situation in Africa and the Western Pacific is currently rather more positive. Our current best estimates tell us that about 10% of the global population may have been infected by this virus. This varies depending on country, it varies from urban to rural, it varies between different groups. But what it does mean is that the vast majority of the world remains at risk. Nothing has changed and everything has changed, because we are now heading into a difficult period. The disease continues to spread. It is on the rise in many parts of the world, but we have learned lessons.
In other news, Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev has supported Turkey's involvement into the peace process for the Nagorno-Karabakh region as potential effort to end the crisis proves futile. Azerbaijan and Armenia both accuse each other of attacking civilian areas in days of fighting that has seen both civilians and military personnel killed in one of the fiercest clashes in the region for more than 25 years. The Turkish President Recep Erdogan has condemned Armenian occupation in Nagorno-Karabakh, vowing support for ethnic Turkic Azerbaijan, while Ankara and Baku have both denied there is any Turkish involvement in the conflict. Now even NATO has gotten into the mix, with Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg calling for a ceasefire in the region as the death toll there rises to 21.
By augmenting your air defense, it is extremely important that we convey a very clear message to all parties involved that they should cease fighting immediately, that we should support all efforts to find a peaceful, negotiated solution, because there is no military solution to the situation in and around Nagorno-Karabakh. And this has been a very clear message from me ever since the fighting started, because it is dangerous for all those people involved, but is of course also something which is of great concern for the whole region and for all NATO allies.
Meanwhile, 4 people are now said to have died in the aftermath of Storm Alex, which struck southeastern France and northwestern Italy over the weekend. Both countries are beginning to assess the damage caused, seeing dozens of houses destroyed and entire roads washed away, especially in the border region near Nice. Coastal areas of the French Riviera were devastated, with long stretches of beaches littered with storm debris. 8 people were formally reported as missing, and another 12 were thought to be missing. And in Italy's Piedmont region, several villages were cut off after the flood made roads impassable. The situation there was described as extremely critical by officials. There have been power outages in many villages on both sides of the border, so have landline and some mobile phone services, which have been disrupted. The winners of the prize for medicine have been announced. There are 2 Americans and a Briton for work in identifying the hepatitis C virus, which caused cirrhosis and liver cancer. The discoveries by scientists Harvey Alter, Charles Rice, and Briton Michael Houghton meant there was now a chance of eradicating the hepatitis C virus completely, the award-winning giving body said. The Nobel Assembly at Sweden's Karolinska Institute, which is awarding the prize of 10 million Swedish crowns, or $1.1 million, said the discovery of the hepatitis C virus revealed the cause of the remaining cases of chronic hepatitis and made possible blood tests and new medicines that have saved millions of lives.
The Nobel Assembly at Karolinska Institutet has today decided to award the 2020 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine jointly to Harvey J. Alter, Michael Horton, and Charles M. Rice for the discovery of hepatitis C virus.
Coming up on The World Today. Have you read any Agatha Christie novels lately? Well, the queen of murder and detective novels, Agatha Christie, said to still be popular 100 years since her first detective novel was published. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Where the Congress of South African Trade Union, COSATU, has been calling for all workers across the country to stay at home in support of what they call the national socioeconomic strike this week. While the strike action will primarily focus on the wage dispute, the Federation also wants President Cyril Ramaphosa to speed up prosecutions of corrupt individuals.
The labor leaders had threatened, and now it's all coming to a head. They say they're mindful of COVID-19, and so the strike has been adapted to fit safety measures required. The Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, an umbrella body, is encouraging workers to exercise their right to challenge and contest what they called a rigged economic system.
The workers need to unite in defending jobs, fighting corruption, as well as shortcoming of the law enforcement agencies in fighting corruption and gender-based violence. We need to fearlessly express our determination to protect the integrity of collective bargaining and to resist all attempts by employers to undermine it.
The workers are to implement the work to rule principle, a form of protest in which employees do exactly what is stated in their contracts and nothing more, as a means to slow down production.
The work to rule campaign. In other words, because we know that there's a chronic shortage of the public servants in the various departments, workers are going to work only for that which they're employed officially to do. No going of extra mile, no doubling up. As I've made an example on Friday, that you have nurses that are doubling up as porters or doubling up as cleaners. We're saying not again shall that happen when there's no incentive that recognizes the fact that these workers are doubling up.
In other cases, people are going to protest. In other, people are saying they're going to be leading some small marches. In other areas, people are saying they're going to be doing a motorcade. So they are going to be driving slowly, arriving there, handing over the memorandum. The intention is to just make a symbolic thing that this thing must be tackled at all costs.
About 1.3 million workers began a work go-slow from lunchtime on Monday, and the strike is expected to come to a head on Wednesday, the 7th of October 2020, when unions will embark on a full-blown national strike if no compromise is reached.
Well, as we mentioned earlier, in the UK, over 12,000 cases of coronavirus have been recorded. This comes just after nearly 16,000 coronavirus cases went underreported in England between September 25th and October 2nd, delaying contact tracing efforts. Here's the global update.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said on Monday that the current soaring numbers of COVID-19 cases was about where government forecasts had predicted, so the next weeks would be crucial to see if local lockdowns could get on top of the virus.
The incidence that we're seeing in the cases really sort of corresponds to pretty much where we thought we were. And to be frank, I think the slightly lower numbers that we'd seen, didn't really reflect where we thought the disease was likely to go. So I think these numbers are realistic.
India plans to receive about 500 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines to inoculate around 250 million people before July next year. The Health Ministry has set up a committee to oversee the entire vaccine supply chain, including vaccine delivery schedules, and at the same time get the manufacturer's commitment to ensure that the maximum dose of the vaccine is available. And in New Zealand, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says coronavirus restrictions in the largest city would be lifted this week, as she expresses confidence that a second wave of COVID-19 infections in Auckland is almost eliminated. And in Russia, the daily tally of new coronavirus cases rose to its highest since May 12 on Monday, as the authorities reported 10,888 new infections nationwide, including 3,537 in Moscow.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is encouraging Brits to go to the cinemas, and that's after Cineworld, the world's second biggest cinema chain, announced the closure of its UK and US movie theaters, leaving as many as 45,000 workers unemployed as it fights the coronavirus-related collapse in film releases and cinema going. Cineworld said the reluctance of studios to go ahead with major releases, such as the new James Bond film, had left it no choice but to close all 536 Regal theaters in the US and its 127 Cineworld and Picture House theaters in the UK from October 8th.
So what's the interesting crack in the knot? Well, obviously we hope to reduce, to keep the numbers of people who lose their jobs down as much as we can, but clearly there are going to be tough times ahead. That's why we've already invested 190 billion in supporting jobs, livelihoods around the country. Supporting local cinemas, I think we've already put 30 million in. But what I would say to people is that local cinemas do now have ways of letting their shows go on in a COVID-secure way. And I'd encourage people to go out to the cinema, enjoy themselves, and support those businesses.
Well, it was partly thanks to a bet with her sister that Agatha Christie wrote her first detective novel. Now, 100 years since it was published, the late author remains a household name, continuing to grow in popularity. Born in Torquay of south of England in 1890, Christie was 30 when in February 1920, her book, The Mysterious Affair at Styles, was serialized in a British newspaper. It was then published in America in October and came out the following year in the UK. According to Guinness World Records, Christie has since become the world's best-selling fiction writer, with her crime novels selling an estimated 2 billion copies in 44 languages. Celebrating the 100th anniversary of this great-grandmother's first published novel, Chairman and CEO of Agatha Christie Ltd. And Agatha Christie's great-grandson, James Pritchard, said he thinks Christie did not expect to earn a living as a writer, and that it was just a bit of fun for her to start with.
I say what's really bothering you, Extra.
All right, well, thanks for staying with us for The World Today. I'm Akaite Afia. Stay safe.